Rodrigo and Rosalia, along with their 5-year-old son Lucas, headed to the fair in the city park. The little boy was eager to ride the attractions, indulge in ice cream and cotton candy, so he looked forward to the outing. The day wasn't overly hot, and the fair attracted a lot of people. There were children with parents, youth, and elderly couples. Everyone found something to enjoy. The youngest ones rode ponies and toy cars, teenagers shot at the shooting range, grandparents listened to street musicians and danced in pairs. Everything was wonderful, but at one point Rodrigo and Rosalia lost sight of Lucas, who was chasing pigeons around the central fountain. "Where's the little one?" exclaimed the worried mother. "He was just here," her husband replied, looking bewildered. The young couple frantically began searching for their son. They asked passers-by if they had seen a curly-haired boy in a red shirt and green shorts, but people just shook their heads in response. How could anyone remember someone in such a crowd? Rodrigo and Rosalia were seriously frightened. Where could he have gone? The young woman fretted. What if he's been kidnapped? Rodrigo did his best to reassure his wife. Don't worry, darling, we'll find him, he said encouragingly, though he himself was very scared. He feared their son might have run out of the park and into traffic. Maybe we should split up, Rodrigo suggested. I'll go to the exit and check the streets. Maybe Lucas remembered where we parked the car and went there. You go to the Green Bridge and look for him there. Rosalia nodded, barely holding back tears. On standby, her husband waved to her and hurried towards the main gates. Meanwhile, Rosalia ran towards the Green Bridge, a local landmark that attracted strollers every day. The bridge was named for the ivy that hung on both sides, forming a green wall. Underneath flowed a small stream, a pleasant spot to sit on summer evenings. Breathless, Rosalia approached the bridge, calling Lucas's name as she went. Suddenly, to her relief, she heard children's laughter. The young woman darted toward the sound and realized it was coming from under the bridge. She pushed aside the ivy and entered the semi-darkness. Her eyes took a moment to adjust, so Rosalia couldn't see anything clearly at first, but she understood that there were two children playing under the bridge. Apparently, they were running back and forth, taking turns chasing each other. Lucas? Rosalia asked hopefully. Mom, she heard her son's familiar voice and couldn't hold back her tears. A moment later, her son was hugging her tightly. You scared me so much, sweetheart, Rosalia said tearfully. You can't run away from Mommy and Daddy. Lucas looked up and met her eyes. Sorry, Mommy. I was playing here with my new friend, Leah. Now Rosalia noticed the little girl about 4 years old. She had curly chestnut hair and a completely dirty face. Where are your mom and dad? Rosalia asked Leah. They're probably looking for you. Leah shook her head. I don't have a daddy, the girl replied seriously. But my mommy is somewhere nearby, playing the flute. It's to make money for us. As the girl fell silent, Rosalia could indeed hear the faint sounds of music. And my grandpa went crazy with grief, Leah continued. He stopped talking. Now he's silent all the time, like a fish. Poor thing, Rosalia thought. I'll take you to your mommy, the young woman said. It's time for Lucas and me to go home. No, Mommy. I want to play a little more with Leah. Lucas protested. It's too late, Rosalia replied. You're tired. But I can sleep here, her son objected. Here, under the bridge? Rosalia was surprised. She couldn't understand where her son got such an idea. Yes, her son replied eagerly. Leah and her family do it. With these words, the boy showed his mother some crumpled blankets and pillows lying on a bed of dry grass. Rosalia was taken aback. So, the girl her son had befriended was homeless. Her first thought was to get Lucas away from here as quickly as possible. But Leah looked at her so trustingly, and she was so cute, that Rosalia wanted to know more about her and her family. She took Lucas and Leah by the hand and led them out from under the bridge. I'll call Lucas's dad now, and then you'll take us to your mom, the young woman said to the girl, taking out her phone from her bag. I found Lucas under the bridge, Rosalia said when Rodrigo picked up the phone. He sighed with relief. I'm coming to you, exclaimed the man, then added anxiously, he wasn't scared, was he? No, everything's fine, Rosalia replied. He was playing with a new friend. We're waiting for you at the bridge. With these words, she hung up. Now let's go to your mom, Rosalia said to the girl. Leon nodded eagerly and ran across the bridge toward the sounds of the flute. Rosalia and Lucas could barely keep up with her. On the other side of the stream, there was a small stage where street musicians often performed, and in front of it, under the shade of willows, there was a row of benches for resting. In the center of the stage, on a low stool, sat a beautiful young woman. With her curly chestnut hair cascading to her shoulders, she closed her eyes and played the flute. She wore a simple, wrinkled linen dress. "Mama, Mama," shouted Leah, climbing the wooden steps onto the stage. "I brought my new friends." Startled, the young woman abruptly opened her eyes and stopped playing. "Leah," she said sternly, looking at her daughter. "I asked you not to shout so loudly. You scared me." Then the young woman's face took on a worried expression. "You're all dirty again. You've been playing in the dirt. We need to go to the river and wash you properly." "Sorry, Mommy," replied the girl as the young woman adjusted her dress. "I'll wash up. But please, let me introduce you to my new friends first. I'm so happy to have met them." Rosalia was surprised by the eloquence of the girl's speech. She seems to come from an educated family, she thought. Meanwhile, concern flashed across Leah's mother's face, but when she glanced at Rosalia and Lucas, she visibly relaxed. Her forehead smoothed, and a faint smile appeared on her face. "My name is Lola," she introduced herself. "I'm a musician." After a moment's pause, she added, "Though right now I'm not looking my best. Our family is going through tough times." With that, the young woman sighed heavily. "I'm Rosalia," Lucas's mother introduced herself. "Nice to meet you." She was increasingly convinced that she was dealing with very educated people. "Leah already mentioned that your grandfather went mad," Lucas chimed in. "Is that why you're having a rough time?" Rosalia gave her son a stern look, but softened a moment later. "He's still such a little child, he doesn't understand tact," she thought. "Excuse Lucas," the young woman apologized to Lola. "Oh, it's nothing," Lola said gently and, turning to the boy, said, "I appreciate your concern, Lucas." He smiled proudly. "No, it's not just that," Lola admitted. "Our house burned down a week ago, and we're living on the streets." As she said this, Lola couldn't hold back her tears. Little Leah began to comfort her mother, affectionately stroking her hand. "Oh, what a pity," Rosalia exclaimed sincerely. "So, your house wasn't insured?" "That's the thing, it wasn't," Lola confessed. "We had just moved there from another city where I grew up. My mother passed away, and my father took it very hard. It's been a year now, and he can't let go and get over the loss. So, I thought moving might help him recover. But it only got worse." Lola sniffled, and at that moment Rodrigo approached them. "Here I am," he smiled at his wife, oblivious to Lola. "Are we ready to go?" "Just a moment, dear," Rosalia said. "Let me introduce you to Lola and her daughter, Leah. They've had a tragedy, their house burned down. It wasn't insured. And now they're living on the streets." Rodrigo cast a sympathetic glance at the young woman. "I'm very sorry," he said. Meanwhile, Rosalia fell into deep thought. "My love," she said after a few moments. "Can I have a word with you?" Rodrigo nodded, and they stepped aside while Leah and Lucas resumed their game of tag. "Listen, Rodrigo," Rosalia began. "From what I gather, Lola and her father are very educated people. She's a musician and earns a living through music. They've been very unlucky. After the fire, they're spending nights under a bridge. How awful, Rodrigo shook his head sadly. And the worst part is, that could happen to anyone. Yes, Rosalia nodded. I can see they're really decent people. What if we help them? Rodrigo looked surprised. But how? We could offer them our country cottage. Just for a while. Rodrigo pondered his wife's words. Are you sure they're trustworthy? Rosalia nodded. Yes, I can see that. They've really had a tough time. All right, Rodrigo agreed. I'll trust your intuition. The young couple returned to Lola. Lola, Rosalia said as the young woman stopped playing the flute again. We have a proposition for you. With these words, she glanced at her husband. You could stay at our country cottage until you sort out your housing situation, Rodrigo said. Lola couldn't believe what she heard. Tears welled up in the young woman's eyes again. Are you really going to do this for us? She exclaimed in surprise. Rosalia and Rodrigo nodded. Of course, Lola. Anyone could find themselves in your situation. So, we're happy to help. It's no trouble for us. Lola sincerely thanked Rosalia and Rodrigo. You're real angels, she said emotionally. They agreed that Rodrigo would drop Rosalia and Lucas off at home, then return to the park for Lola, her father, and Leah to take them to the country cottage. The family had very few belongings, just documents, Leah's favorite doll, and Lola's flute. The blankets and pillows given by compassionate people, the young woman did not take. Rodrigo drove the family to the cottage and showed them the rooms and the small garden, which delighted Leah. The girl couldn't believe her happiness. Now we have a home again, she rejoiced. Rodrigo left the family in the house and went to the supermarket to buy groceries for them for the first time. Then, with a sense of duty fulfilled, he returned home. Rodrigo was a businessman, and soon he had a business trip to another city. He decided to take his son and his wife, who was not working, with him. I'll need to be there for 3 months, so it's better for you to come with me to keep from being alone at home, he said. Rosalia gladly agreed. She loved to travel, and she liked a change of scenery. Besides, in the city where her husband was going, her friend whom she hadn't seen in a long time lived. Things fell into place nicely, and Rodrigo managed to find a good apartment downtown, which he rented for 3 months. Rosalia looked forward to the trip. Before leaving, she called Lola and asked how she and her family were doing. The young woman replied that everything was fine, and she thanked Rosalia again for the opportunity to stay at the cottage. I go into the city every day to play. For now, we have enough money, but I understand we can't use your hospitality forever. So, I'm diligently looking for a good job. Don't rush, Lola. You can stay with us until you find the perfect solution, Rosalia replied. Lola sincerely thanked the young woman once again. I'm doing everything I can, she said, and, after a pause, added with a smile, Leah keeps talking about Lucas all the time. She wants to invite him over. Rosalia told the young woman that she, Rodrigo, and their son were leaving for 3 months but would definitely visit them when they returned. That was the end of their conversation. Rodrigo, Rosalia, and Lucas had a wonderful time in another city. Mother and son walked a lot during the day, and in the evenings, when Rodrigo came home from work, they played board games and went to cafes for dinner. Rosalia felt like she was on a second honeymoon, albeit this time with her little son by her side. Time flew by very quickly, and soon the day came when they had to return to their hometown. The family left early in the morning and arrived home by evening. Lucas was overjoyed to see his favorite red car-shaped bed. "Mama, I'm so happy we're home," the little one exclaimed. "I missed it so much." "Me too," replied Rosalia. "It's nice to visit, but there's no place like home." Lucas hugged his beloved teddy bear and suddenly remembered something. "When are we going to visit Leah?" Rosalia pondered for a moment. "Maybe tomorrow?" "Let's do it," agreed Lucas. "Will Daddy drive us in the car?" Rosalia kissed him on the forehead. "I think so," she nodded. "Let me ask him." Rodrigo wasn't opposed, especially since he didn't have work the next day. Rosalia called Lola the next day and warned her that they would be visiting. The young woman felt like Leah's mom hesitated for a moment, but then said, "Yes, of course, we'll be waiting for you." Rosalia decided she must have imagined it. The next day, the family woke up, had an omelet and toast with cocoa for breakfast, and set off for the cottage. Lucas couldn't wait to see Leah. When they pulled up to the house, the girl came out onto the porch and, seeing the familiar car, ran up to the gate. "It's you. You've finally come," she exclaimed joyfully and, lowering her voice, confided, "and Grandpa has arranged such a surprise." Rosalia's heart sank. Had the old man caused trouble in the house? Was that why Lola didn't seem happy to hear they were coming to visit? Rosalia bit her lip and prepared for the worst. But when she and Rodrigo entered the room, they couldn't believe their eyes. The walls of the living room, which had been empty before, were now adorned with paintings. Rosalia even felt for a moment that she had stepped into an art gallery. "I'll explain everything to you now," Lola hurriedly said as she greeted them. It was clear she was very nervous. Rodrigo and Rosalia stared at the young woman, waiting. They had no idea where all these canvases had come from. It had only been 3 months, and Lola had become a collector of paintings in that time? But where did she get the money? Wasn't she looking for a job to move into her own place? Rosalia's head was spinning. "All these paintings were done by my father," Lola finally confessed. Rosalia and Rodrigo exchanged astonished looks. "So, he's an artist?" the man clarified. Lola shook her head in response. "No, he never was. I've never seen him pick up a brush in my life, until recently," Lola said. "Then I don't understand," Rodrigo shrugged. "It's because of my mother. As I mentioned before, she passed away just over a year ago, and my father couldn't find peace. He didn't talk to anyone. Then about a week after we moved here, he suddenly asked me to buy him canvas and paints. It seemed strange to me, but I couldn't refuse him. He had been silent for so long. That day I lingered in the square where I played the flute to earn more money. I had enough for a small canvas, brushes, and the cheapest set of paints. At home, my father thanked me for getting everything he needed. He set himself up in the garden, creating a workspace, and to my surprise, I saw him start to paint. I didn't want to disturb him. He sat in the garden for over 4 hours, hardly moving and not looking up from his work. I quietly left the house and approached him unheard. Looking over his shoulder, I saw that he had painted a poppy field and a girl in a red dress, so beautifully that I couldn't believe my eyes. When the painting was finished, my father silently stood up and went inside without looking at me. He locked himself in his room, and I thought I heard him crying. I carefully took my father's painting and hung it on the wall. The next day, my father asked me to buy him another canvas, which I did. The same thing happened again. Dad painted for a very long time and then silently went back to his room. I hung the painting on the wall again, just like the first time. This repeated many times, as you probably guessed. "This is amazing," Rosalia said, examining the paintings. "It seems your father has a real gift that apparently lay dormant in him all his life." Lola nodded, barely holding back tears. "It's a pity Mom never saw this," she said. Rosalia agreed with her. Yes, she would have loved it. Meanwhile, Rodrigo was silently thoughtful, as if considering something in his mind. "Maybe we should sit in the garden?" "I'll bring some drinks," Lola suggested. "With pleasure," Rosalia replied. They left the house and, descending from the porch, walked along the path to a white gazebo shaded by a large oak tree. There was a small table and 2 garden benches. Rodrigo and Rosalia sat down on one of them. "What are you thinking about?" the young woman asked. "I have an idea," Rodrigo replied seriously. Rosalia didn't interfere with him. Lola brought a tray with cool lemonade and fresh fruits. "Help yourselves," she warmly offered, placing the tray on the table and sitting across from the young couple. Rosalia gladly took a sip, only now realizing how thirsty she was. How's the job search going? She cautiously asked, not wanting Lola to think she was trying to drive her away from the summer cottage. Lola sighed. Not well so far, she sadly replied. It was clear this question troubled the young woman, and Rosalia regretted asking it. She reached out and took Lola's hand. You'll find a job for sure. Everything happens in its own time, Rosalia encouraged. I hope so, Lola weakly smiled. I need a job to find my own place. At that moment, Rodrigo chimed in. I have an alternative idea, he said weightily. Both women looked at him with surprise. Your father's paintings. Rodrigo began. You've seen them yourself. I'm sure they could interest wealthy investors and patrons. Why not try to contact someone in that circle? Rosalia smiled. Well, Rodrigo. So that's what you've been thinking about. What a clever idea. It never even crossed my mind. A whole mix of feelings crossed Lola's face: excitement, hope, joy, and doubt. It's a wonderful thought, but I don't know anyone in this city. I have no connections, Lola said. Rosalia turned to Rodrigo. And what about you, darling? She asked. He smiled mysteriously. I think I might know someone. With these words, he took a big sip of lemonade. A week passed. One evening, Rodrigo came home with sparkling eyes. I think I found a suitable patron, he said. His name is Alejandro Dominguez. He wants to see Lola's father's paintings. Rosalia was so overjoyed that she hugged Rodrigo. Great news, she exclaimed. When can he visit Lola? We agreed on the end of the week. Friday, probably after lunch, he replied. Then I'll call Lola now and confirm if she'll be home at that time, said Rosalia. Leah's mother answered that she would eagerly await the guests. On Friday, Lucas and his mother went to visit Lola and her family in Rosalia's car. Rodrigo was delayed and couldn't catch up with them. We'll meet at Lola's. I'll bring Alejandro Dominguez, her husband said. Rosalia rarely drove, so she was a bit nervous on the road, but fortunately everything went more than smoothly, and she neatly parked at the country house. Leah ran onto the porch and rushed to Lucas with wild cries of joy. You finally came. I've been waiting so long. Mom and I baked a chocolate cake, she exclaimed. Lucas jumped out of the car and ran to his girlfriend. Rosalia turned off the engine and calmly headed for the house. Lola was still busy in the kitchen, decorating the cake with cream roses. Rosalia wanted to help, but the young woman just shook her head. Just a little left, she said. Then I'll wait in the living room, Rosalia said. I'll finish and bring drinks shortly, Lola promised. Don't rush, replied Rosalia from the living room. Her attention was once again drawn to Lola's father's paintings. She started walking along the walls, carefully examining them. Stopping in front of the very first canvas depicting a poppy field and a girl, Rosalia took a deep breath. For a moment, she felt like she could sense the summer day captured on the canvas by the gifted artist. I remember this field as if it were today, Rosalia suddenly heard a hoarse elderly voice. Startled, she turned around and saw Lola's father standing before her. She couldn't believe he was speaking to her. It was a hot May day, the old man continued. Esmeralda and I were riding bikes and stopped at this poppy field. It was our first date. Esmeralda, is that Lola's mom? Rosalia cautiously clarified. The old man nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Tell me, how did you two meet? The young woman dared to ask, sitting down on the edge of the couch. The old man weakly smiled at her and sat down on the other side. He paused for a moment, his eyes clouded with a mist of memories. Then Leah's grandfather sighed and began his story. I first saw Esmeralda when I came to study in the college town in the south of the country. She was sitting on a bench in the park under a peach tree, reading some book. She wore a white dress with pink flowers, and the wind gracefully played with the ruffles. I couldn't take my eyes off this girl. She was slender and tall, and her long reddish chestnut hair constantly fell onto her face. She impatiently brushed it away and turned page after page, oblivious to the world around her. Books were always her passion. I wanted to sit on the bench next to her, but suddenly a tall guy approached her. Esmeralda flinched when he called her by name, but then immediately smiled at him. He sat down next to her and handed her a sandwich in a paper bag. They had lunch together and laughed, while I stood aside and burned with jealousy. I desperately wanted to be in that tall guy's place. After watching them for about 5 minutes, I croaked with frustration and left the park in a very bad mood. I thought I would soon forget the girl in the white dress, but she started haunting my dreams at night. During the day, I desperately wanted to see her again. And one day, my dream came true. My friend invited me to go to the movies for a comedy session. I agreed because I had nothing better to do. Of course, I would have preferred to go to the movies with the girl, not with my friend, but I had no choice. We arrived there just before 8 o'clock and stood in line at the box office. Out of boredom, I was examining the posters on the walls when suddenly I heard a very infectious and vaguely familiar laughter. I looked in the direction from where it was coming and saw that very same girl from the park. Today she was wearing a blue dress with small polka dots, the top of which hugged her slender waist, and the skirt flared out to her delicate ankles. The girl's legs were adorned with white sandals. She had tied her hair up in a high ponytail and put on long silver earrings. She looked so charming that I stood there with my mouth open. However, just a moment later, I was again filled with frustration. Next to the girl was the same tall guy. He was animatedly telling her something, and she was laughing at his jokes. I felt a pang of jealousy again. Why was he next to her and not me? Sensing my gaze, the girl suddenly looked straight into my eyes. I distinctly felt myself blushing. She slightly squinted and bit her lower lip. It was so exciting that for a moment I lost touch with reality. Then Esmeralda quickly looked away and didn't look in my direction again. My friend noticed that I seemed to be absent and followed my gaze. "Are you infatuated with this girl?" he asked mockingly. "Do you know her?" I asked hopefully instead of answering. My friend nodded. "She's studying at the philological faculty. There are the most beautiful girls there." "Yes, she's beautiful. But that tall guy is always around her. I can't even approach her." My friend looked again at Esmeralda and her companion. "She looks at him like that," he whistled. "It seems you don't stand a chance, old man." His words made me bitter, and I firmly resolved to forget the girl in the blue dress. But I didn't keep my word. The next time I saw her in the library, she was wearing a soft yellow blouse and a pink skirt. Her hair freely cascaded down her shoulders. The girl wore glasses and looked very smart and serious. She was alone. Of course, I knew she had a boyfriend, but something pushed me toward her. I decided it was my chance, which couldn't be missed, and approached her closer, grabbing the first book I came across on the way. "Can I sit at your table?" I asked with a trembling voice. My knees were shaking, and my heart was pounding like crazy. Esmeralda looked up and gazed at me with surprise. I couldn't tell if she recognized me or not. She glanced around as if to suggest that almost all the tables in the hall were free, and then gave me a mischievous smile. "Of course, sit down," nodded Esmeralda, rearranging a few books to make it more comfortable for me. I sat down and pretended to be engrossed in reading. However, the book I picked up happened to be an advanced mathematics handbook, something I never understood. Sneaking a glance over Esmeralda's shoulder, I noticed she was reading Plato. "Do you like philosophy?" I ventured to ask with a voice that felt foreign to me. She looked up at me, and I feared she might scold me for interrupting. Instead, she smiled. "He has interesting thoughts," she replied, and immersed herself in reading again. I returned to the incomprehensible formulas and pondered my next question, but it wasn't necessary. "I'm hungry," suddenly said Esmeralda. "Would you like to go to the cafeteria and grab a snack?" I stared at her in astonishment. Was she inviting me? "I just hate eating alone," Esmeralda confessed, shrugging her delicate shoulders. I had no choice but to agree. As we walked towards the stairs, I was secretly overjoyed. Yet, I couldn't help but worry that her boyfriend might suddenly appear during lunch, which dampened my enthusiasm. We descended to the cafeteria, nearly empty at that hour. Esmeralda chose a table by the window and sat down. I took the seat opposite her. "What would you like?" I asked, handing her the menu. "I love the croissants with cream cheese and blueberries here. How about you?" Confessing that I rarely visited cafes, I shrugged. "I think I'll try your favorite croissant." "And I'll have a cappuccino," Esmeralda added with a nod. I placed our order and was told it would be ready in 5 minutes. Returning to the table, I cautiously looked at Esmeralda. "So, you study advanced mathematics?" she asked, squinting slightly. She sees right through me, I thought. "Actually, no," I confessed. "Sometimes I just need a distraction. I'm a historian." "Oh, I didn't expect that," Esmeralda said, surprised. "So you're also a humanities person?" "We have a lot in common," I blurted out, blushing deeply. Fortunately, the waiter arrived with our order, and we eagerly dug in. I was hungrier than I realized, and the croissant was indeed delicious. Suddenly, I felt very comfortable with Esmeralda, like I could just be myself. It was different from my experiences with other girls. I relaxed, and our conversation flowed easily and naturally. To be honest, I forgot about everything else in the world, so when her tall friend suddenly appeared at our table, I froze. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you," he said to Esmeralda without paying any attention to me. I expected her to blush or become flustered that her friend caught her with someone else, but she just smiled cheerfully. "Oh, Pablo, sorry I didn't warn you. Were you waiting for me upstairs?" "Yes," in the philosophy literature section, Pablo nodded and pulled a chair to sit at our table. I was very surprised because I didn't notice any jealousy in him. He didn't cast sideways glances at me or appear nervous. Esmeralda also acted completely at ease. "Oh, I didn't introduce you too," she suddenly realized, looking at me with embarrassment. "This is..." She glanced at me shyly. "I'm sorry, but I didn't ask your name." With that, she giggled. Pablo joined in. "Oh, Esmeralda, you're always in your own world. Sitting in a cafe with a young man and not even knowing his name. Esmeralda." That was the first time I heard that divine name, and it imprinted itself on my heart forever. "My name is Ernesto," I said. Just like Hemingway, Esmeralda smiled approvingly. "Easy to remember." She took a sip of her cappuccino and said, "And this is Pablo, my brother." I couldn't believe it at first. The tall guy I'd been so jealous of turned out to be Esmeralda's brother. How foolish I had been. I should have asked right away. I felt so uplifted that I wanted to skip, sing, and dance. But naturally, I restrained myself. "Very nice to meet you, Pablo." Like Picasso, I echoed Esmeralda's joke, and the three of us laughed. Later, I took Esmeralda's phone number and went home. No, went wouldn't be accurate. I flew through the streets of the town as if carried by wings. The next day, I called Esmeralda and invited her for a walk. It was a day off, and the streets were filled with elegantly dressed people. Esmeralda looked wonderful in a red sundress and a white blouse with lantern sleeves. She tied her hair with a red ribbon and wore small golden flower-shaped earrings. We walked for a long time in the main park in the city center. When we stopped for a snack at the cafe, Esmeralda suddenly spotted a bike rental nearby. We quickly finished the sandwiches I had ordered, drank some juice, and ran over there. "I love bike rides," Esmeralda said, holding my hand tightly. Her touch felt comforting, and I was ready to do anything for her. If she had suggested flying to the moon at that moment, I would have agreed without hesitation. We rented 2 bikes and started riding. Our town was small, so we didn't notice how we ended up on the outskirts. I suggested we return to the center, but Esmeralda shook her head. let's go outside the town, she said. I want to take a walk in the field. I couldn't argue with her, so we went further, although I was already very tired. I was never quite athletic. Esmeralda, on the other hand, looked fresh and energetic. She must have really loved cycling. When I was 5, my dad gave me my first tricycle, Esmeralda said when we stopped to admire the beautiful view. Wow, that's great, I replied, looking at her tenderly. She looked very beautiful at that moment. Her hair was tousled, cheeks flushed. I desperately wanted to kiss her, but I restrained myself. Since then, I can't remember a time when I didn't have a bicycle, Esmeralda continued. Though now I'm so far from everything I used to love. She sighed heavily. I miss my parents and my grandma a lot, she confessed. It's good that Pablo is with me. I wanted to hug her to comfort her, and this time I didn't hold back. Esmeralda pressed against me, and I felt like I was holding a precious treasure in my arms. We stood like that for a while, then got back on our bikes and continued. Ahead of us stretched a large poppy field. The crimson poppies wonderfully complemented Esmeralda's red dress. I regretted not bringing a camera with me. Instead, I tried to capture the scene in my memory. We wandered through the poppy field for a long time, hardly speaking to each other, just enjoying the sun, warmth, and the fact that we were together. I will always remember that wonderful day, and it remains as vivid in my memories as it was over 50 years ago. With these words, Lola's father sighed again and wiped a tear. Rosalia wanted to hug him, but she hesitated. And the other paintings, are they also reflections of your memories? She asked. The old man nodded. Yes, each canvas holds a piece of my life that I was fortunate to share with Esmeralda. It's a pity she left us so early. Every moment I spent with her will forever remain in my memory. How beautiful, Rosalia murmured. At that moment, Lola entered the living room with a tray in her hands. I made lemonade, she said, and, noticing her father, almost dropped the tray. Rosalia quickly got up from the couch to help her. I'll put the tray on the table myself, the young woman said, and Lola nodded. Dad, I was just surprised to see you here. You rarely leave your room. Did you talk? Saying this, Lola looked puzzled. Yes, Senor Ernesto told me about your mom Esmeralda, Rosalia said. Really? Lola couldn't stop marveling. Rosalia asked how we met, and I wanted to share our story with her and Esmeralda, the old man confessed quietly. It was very romantic, Rosalia added. I was enchanted. It seems like a whole book could be written about you. Old Ernesto cast a grateful glance at the young woman. I would be pleased to read that book and relive all the happiness I experienced with my beloved. With these words, the old man smiled dreamily. Maybe someday Liao will do it, Lola said. She already loves to write stories and even tries to write down her own stories. How wonderful! Rosalia exclaimed. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and Lola hurried to open it. Rodrigo and a rather attractive young man in a suit entered. He had wavy black hair, tan skin, a mustache, and a neat beard. The type of man to whom Alejandro belonged really appealed to Lola. The young people entered the house, and the unfamiliar gentleman immediately noticed Ernesto's paintings. This is amazing, Rodrigo, he whispered instead of a greeting. Believe me, when you talked about the paintings, I didn't think they would be so wonderful. Rosalia's husband nodded happily and hastened to introduce the guest. As you may have guessed, this is Alejandro Dominguez, a well-known patron in town. The man politely bowed his head and smiled at everyone present with the most charming smile that unexpectedly made Lola's heart beat faster. And this is Lola, Rosalia, and Senor Ernesto, the author of the paintings you have the honor to contemplate on the walls of our humble home, Rodrigo jokingly introduced the others. Alejandro smiled again and kissed Lola's hand. She blushed. Everyone sat down on the couch, but Alejandro continued to stand, examining Ernesto's paintings. I can say one thing, these are stunning works. They convey life, movement, smells, sounds, and love. Isn't it wonderful? I swear, I'm enchanted by these paintings. The old man Ernesto even shed a tear upon hearing these words. I'm very pleased that you appreciate my work so highly, he confessed. Although I'm no artist, it's just a way for me to express my feelings. Alejandro nodded understandingly. And that's exactly how true high art is born, he remarked. I'm ready to buy all your paintings, if you'll allow. All eyes turned to old Ernesto. He remained silent for a while, then finally spoke up. Of course, these paintings are dear to me, as they are memories of Esmeralda. But I have no right to keep them locked away. Let the world see them. Lola smiled and hugged her father. Your memories have found physical form to become a part of many people's lives, she said, and the old man agreed with her. So it's settled. Alejandro exclaimed joyfully. Let's toast to our meeting. He raised his glass of lemonade, and everyone followed suit. Later, Lola treated the guests and children to chocolate cake and other delicacies. Towards evening, Rodrigo, Rosalia, and Alejandro bid a heartfelt farewell to old Ernesto and left the house. Rodrigo headed towards the car while Rosalia searched for Lucas in the garden, who was busy playing with Leah. Lola and Alejandro remained alone. May I have your phone number? The man asked. I'll call you to arrange a meeting once the lawyer prepares the contract. Lola gave the young man her number. It was nice to meet you, he said, kissing her hand again. Until we meet again, Lola. Until then, Alejandro, the young woman replied, trying to calm her racing heart. For a moment, she felt that she had also made an impression on him. A few days later, Alejandro and Lola signed the contract, and the young woman received a substantial sum of money, which was enough to buy a new house. For the housewarming, she invited Rosalia, Rodrigo, and Lucas, as well as Alejandro, with whom they had been actively corresponding since then. The house seemed more than charming to everyone, spacious, bright, and cozy. Leah got her own room, which she immediately showed to Lucas. Old Ernesto spent some time with the guests before retiring to his room. He had already begun working on a new painting. The young people had a great time, discussing various topics, and later Rodrigo and Rosalia prepared to leave for home. Lola escorted them to the gate, leaving Alejandro and herself alone. Lola, may I ask you a personal question? Alejandro asked. The young woman noticed his slightly trembling hands. Of course, she replied, shyly glancing at him. About Leah's father. What happened to him? Alejandro awkwardly inquired. Lola lowered her head. He passed away when Leah was just a year old, she answered softly. I'm sorry, Alejandro sympathetically murmured. He didn't know what to say or where to put his hands. Lola looked up and met his gaze. It's okay, she whispered. I've come to terms with the loss. My late husband holds a special place in my heart, but life goes on. Alejandro nodded. Then, may I dare to invite you on a date, he stammered. Lola lowered her eyelashes and nodded. Yes, you may, she said. Thus began another beautiful love story. Alejandro and Lola started dating, fell in love, and a year later, the man proposed to the young woman, who happily accepted. She continued to play the flute, but thanks to her husband's connections, she now performed in concerts. Lola and Alejandro, along with Rosalia and Rodrigo, continued their close friendship as families, and their children eagerly anticipated each new meeting. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.